I think I found my first pornographic image on the playground in elementary school when I was 7 or 8 or 9 years old. And I just remember, being enthralled, being curious, just that rush of adrenaline and not really knowing what to do with that.
When children start to learn to live a split-off life, when a child begins to feel that they have no place to turn, we start to live these split-off lives.
Around that time was when my parents were getting divorced, so there was already a lot of just a lot of brokenness.
When people would, when I was very much living a double life and really broken and living out a lot of sexual sin and had a lot of shame, even when people would affirm me or bless me or love me or whatever, the thing that I felt all the time is, that's nice, but if you only knew me.
I learned to manipulate from a very young age, and the divorce kind of allowed me to do that and kind of set the stage for me learning how to live a double life. I know what I can get away with at dad's house. I know what I can get away with at mom's house.
The idea that somehow divorce is just easy for kids or it's not that big of a deal is bullcrap.
Divorce is horrible. It's traumatic, it's tragic, and I truly believe that divorce grieves the heart of God.
If we would begin to open up our hearts, there's so much opportunity for change and transformation. We may feel like in the time that he's punishing us or he's being harsh with us, but he's only being as harsh as our behavior and our resistance requires.
I was 23 years old, and I, like you had mentioned, I had prayed the sinner's prayer leading up to that. I had rededicated my life prior to that, but this time it was real. And this time it was, okay, God, I'm ready.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. So great that you could join us today. I'm excited for you to hear from a newer friend of mine. This is somebody that my assistant Jeremiah has known for quite some time. He contributed one of the chapters of this book, New Identity, one of the 11 chapters on his personal story of how God met him and his brokenness. And we wanted to bring him in for this particular podcast to share with you as well. So Jonny, thanks so much for joining us. Let's just start off with you sharing some of your story with our audience.
My name is Jonny Tillery, and I'm 37 years old. I'm a father of 4, a husband of a little over 12 years now, and recovering Christ follower from some serious sexual brokenness that started at an early age for me. I think I found my first pornographic image on the playground in elementary school when I was 7 or 8 or 9 years old. Mm-hmm. And I just remember, being enthralled, being curious, just that rush of adrenaline and not really knowing what to do with that. I tell in my story in the book that I took that image home to my babysitter and I was just excited to share it with somebody. And I was kind of just met with a little bit of, hey, don't do that. And, not really much conversation. I don't even think he told my parents. And so, growing up, nobody had to tell me to be attracted to the human body. I just was, and that door was opened. And unfortunately, around that time was when my parents were getting divorced. So there was already a lot of, just a lot of brokenness and a lot of confusion and a lot of questioning about my identity and about a lot of things. So I was prone and vulnerable to attacks on my sexuality and who I was.
So Jonny, talk about that for just a little bit in terms of, so when, do you remember how old you were when your parents actually did file for divorce?
Yeah, the divorce was finalized when I was 9 years old.
Okay, so you're 9 years old, and so this event on the playground where you found this pornographic image was before then. But what was kind of going on in your home? I mean, obviously, if divorce is happening, then the environment probably isn't very peaceful. Like what? And also, were you an only child, or did you have siblings around you at the time as well?
Yeah, I have 2 older brothers, and during that time, my parents were separated, I believe, and they're both Christ followers, and they're both amazing, loving, generous people. I never had any question of whether or not they loved me. But they were both broken in their own ways, and they would admit that. I want to make sure I honor them, but
Yes.
just be a truth teller at the same time. They both had their own pursuits and their own identity questions and crisis that made them vulnerable and susceptible to relational brokenness that ultimately culminated in divorce, which, looking back, I don't know if both of my parents would have survived if they didn't. So it was probably the best thing. But again, I may be oversharing stories that aren't
that's
mine.
okay. But regardless of what happened in terms of moving forward and talking about yourself, I don't know. I would love. I don't want to put words in your mouth at all, but I do know, based on the idea that so many times I read about people that just kind of consider divorce to not be that big of a deal, or that kids are resilient and they bounce back, and it's better for kids that you get a divorce. I understand in some situations that if neither person will give, and even if one person in the relationship won't really work on their issues and their stuff, it can make a very volatile environment for kids to grow up in. But the idea that somehow divorce is just easy for kids, or it's not that big of a deal, or it's a perk, you get to go to 2 different places on Christmas. I mean, all that bullcrap
Right.
is just that. Really, talk about a little bit before you move forward about just the impact of what the divorce was like for you.
Yeah, it was horrible. I didn't get a lot of attention that I probably needed, especially as a person who naturally has a pretty rebellious spirit. You tell me not to do something, and that's the very thing that I'm going to want to do.
Right.
And so divorce is horrible. It's traumatic. It's tragic. There's a reason that God says what God has put together, let no man separate. And I truly believe that divorce grieves the heart of God because of how badly it damages the two involved and families. And it just causes havoc and trauma in families. And it certainly did for me. It was painful. And a lot of the things that happened during that time, I didn't even get to process until a lot later in life. And that was hard. I learned to manipulate from a very young age, and the divorce kind of allowed me to do that, and kind of set the stage for me learning how to live a double life. I know what I can get away with at dad's house. I know what I can get away with at mom's house.
Yeah, there you go.
I know what face I need to put on here, and I know what mask I need to wear over here. And so, yeah, it was hard, and it was ugly, and it was, and I have compassion for my parents too, because I know that they were deeply wounded by it as well.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. And you mention, I talk a lot about this as well. You mentioned the idea of learning to put on one face here and one face at mom's place and dad's place. And what I learned in growing up in my home, my parents did stay together, but what I learned is I behaved one way in front of my parents and at church, and then I behaved in a very different way when I was kind of off by myself, and certainly pursuing pornography and those kinds of things and sexual things, in the neighborhood, etc. But I find that one of the most damaging things for kids is when they are in situations where they don't have an outlet, and they don't have somebody. I was just talking about this a moment ago with somebody else. They don't have someone who is intentionally, especially a dad, shepherding the hearts of a son or even a daughter. And that we're in an environment that, and I would love for you to speak to this too. I don't know if you grew up, I don't know if your parents were taking you to church at this time or not, but the idea here is when children start to learn to live a split off life, when they, at the age of, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, when they start to feel, when a child begins to feel that they have no place to turn to work out the junk going on inside of them, or they feel shame about something, which the enemy loves to introduce into children's lives as early as possible, the tendency, unless you have somebody who's actively, regularly drawing up those deep waters, drawing up and helping you process and feel like what's really going on here. That I think that's such an essential part of shepherding for dads for children, and yet it so rarely happens even in Christian homes. And so we start to live these split off lives, and that doesn't just disappear when we move into adulthood. Actually, we carry that forward, and it becomes pretty entrenched. So I think that's part of your story, is how that double living in the frankly any kind of addiction, lying as a companion of any kind of addiction. So can you just maybe talk a little bit more about the double life kind of thing, and how you kind of carry that forward?
Yeah. I just agree with everything that you just said. And I think part of the value of the family staying together is consistency, right? And a foundation of consistency, especially through developmental years as a child. And I just didn't have that. To your first point of a father being very lovingly invested in drawing out those deep waters, I think my dad wanted to do that. I think he truly desired to do that. But he was caught up a lot in his other pursuits as a very extremely successful businessman, recently divorced. He wanted to seek out and find another wife. And so dating and, bringing girlfriends around, just, he wanted to do it well. And I knew he loved me, but you can only give away what you have, and you can't give away what you don't have. And I don't think he was equipped with many of the tools that he wished he could have been. And he was still a great dad, but and nobody's perfect. And even as we're talking about this, I'm processing my own thoughts as a father, and yes, how I want to be lovingly and emotionally available, lovingly invested in my own children's life. Yet I'm still so selfish, and I get caught up in my own junk, in my own pursuits, in my own tiredness and all of that.
Well, and let me just jump in to add something else here, is that, and I can tell it's important to you, and rightly so, and it's important to me. My parents have both passed away and gone home to be the Lord, but I hated my dad growing up in my situation, and I couldn't stand him as a teenager. There was so much brokenness between us, but we became very, very close later in life, especially in my later 20s, probably mid to late 20s, and even more so in my 30s and into my 40s. And my dad passed away in 2010, but we had developed a really close relationship. I love my dad. I respect him and honor him in so many ways. And there's a lot to honor. And I oftentimes say that because when I talk about my early life with him, it can sound like, oh, I just can't stand my dad, or that's not true at all. And I can tell from what you're saying, like, you want to honor your parents. And the truth is, we all, parents grow up, and if they're in the faith, they mature more in the faith, and where they're at today, like when we're doing a podcast like this, would be very different than where they were a number of years before, when you were 9 years old or whatever. And so we always want to be able to leave room for the grace of God to do big things in our parents' lives, whether they're together or divorced or whatever. So to me, it sounds like you have a great relationship with them, and that you really honor and respect them and those kinds of things. And so we want to make sure that that's clear as well. But as you're talking and going forward, you can speak to that if you want to, but as you're talking and kind of going forward from the divorce, what kind of happened from there that drew you in more deeply into living a double life?
Yeah, I kind of, as I mentioned, and thank you for saying that, because I do have a great relationship with my dad now. I love my mom and dad. They are devoted followers of Christ. My dad is the most generous man I've ever known, and has left an incredible legacy and example to follow in many, many ways. So, yes, thank you for saying that, and making room for that. Going back to the double life, just kind of like I said, going from mom's house to dad's house, I knew how much freedom I had at dad's house and what I could get away with there. And I knew what I could and couldn't do at mom's house. And the ways that I would have to, manipulate and get around the rules. And a lot of the times mom and dad were working. Growing up, going to school, I spent most of the time at my mom's house, and she was getting her PhD. Right after the divorce, she was finishing up her PhD. She was working as a professor at a university. A lot of the time, I was kind of in some ways being raised by a babysitter. And a babysitter's job is not to invest and, really shepherd a heart, but their job is
alive, basically
entertain, keep you alive, right? All of that stuff. And so just always pushing the limits for me. Getting away with what I could get away with, and just wanting to do things my own way. A big part of my testimony is not understanding the heart of God and seeing him as a cosmic killjoy who wanted to ruin all my fun.
Yes.
And throughout my life, that's what rules were. They were designed to ruin all my fun, because obviously the things that I want to do are great and fun. But what I've come to realize is that I actually suck as the CEO of my life, and God is a good father who wants to keep me from pain and keep me from misery and suffering. And he knows that us going off and doing our own thing in our own way only ends one way every time. And so, yeah, from a young age, living the double life, wanting to please my parents. And I've always been a performer. I've always been someone who, I can't stand it if you don't like me. I want you to like me. So I'm going to perform. I'm going to put on a mask, and I'm going to do my best to impress you, because then if I can get you to like me, then maybe I'll like myself, or I'll feel valuable or worthy of love, or any of those things. And so
Jonny, on that point, I'm wondering, I want you to pick up right there after this, but I'm wondering, for me, when people would, when I was very much living a double life and really broken and living out a lot of sexual sin and had a lot of shame, even when people would affirm me or bless me or love me or whatever, the thing that I felt all the time is, that's nice, but if you only knew me. I mean, if you, so there was never anything about the love that was coming my direction that would ever settle or land or be sustained. I might experience it for a moment, but it was immediately swallowed up by this sense of, yeah, you wouldn't want to have anything to do with me if you actually knew me. So do you recall any of, it might not be anything I just said, but for yourself, did it feel like that was actually satisfactory when you could get people to really like you by kind of whatever, doing what they want to do or coming across in a way that seemed cool to them or what have you? Did that really satisfy you, or was it pretty short-lived?
So no, I mean, right. It's always short-lived. The praise of man, or the satisfaction of getting a woman to fall in love with me or sleep with me or whatever, it's always very short. It's an empty dead end. And but it took me so long to realize that. I thought I must be doing it wrong. It must be the wrong woman. It must be the wrong people. Maybe if I could get, and that's how addiction works, right?
Yeah, it's
deeper
true.
and deeper and deeper, and you follow the rabbit trail. And every time it leaves you empty. I don't know that I was able to process that in real time, because it's all I knew. It was my medication. It would make the pain go away for a little while, which was better than the shame all the time.
Yeah, and when we're in the midst of it, we're not connecting the dots.
Right. So yeah, and that was the path for me. As I continued to grow up through my teenage years, porn was something that I did, in secret by myself, and eventually wasn't enough, and wanted to start acting out with people. And so I would date girls and try to get them to fall in love with me, and eventually sleep with me. And that didn't answer the question inside my heart either. But in my broken thinking patterns, like I just mentioned, it was like, oh, well, she must not be the one. So I've got to continue my pursuit of the one that will finally fulfill me, or do it for me or whatever.
Yeah.
And like we just said, that's an empty, it's like opening up a Christmas present and it's empty. It's just an empty box every time.
Yeah. So how did things kind of advance for you from, maybe through high school, and then I'm assuming you went on to college, maybe not, but what kind of happened in your late teens and into your 20s in terms of your relationship with God? Where along the way here, was there ever a time that you had really surrendered your life to Him? For me, I grew up in church and prayed the sinner's prayer several times as a kid, but I really don't look at any of that as being a genuine. It wasn't until I was 23 years of age that I finally came to a breaking point of surrender. I'd never surrendered before then. I was just trying to get fire insurance, basically. So how about yourself?
Exactly. That's so funny. My story exactly the same, 23 years old. So yeah, I grew up going to church with my parents. They would take me on the weekends, and in high school, I even, I called myself a Christian, and I think I really wanted a relationship with God, but I had this underlying shame, and I really loved my sin too. And I knew it was sin. I knew it was bad. Every time I would look at pornography and act out, I would feel bad afterwards. There was a conviction in my spirit, but I really had no desire to, even if I had the desire to change, I just didn't have the tools, and I really didn't want to. And so, and I had become an alcoholic by the time I was 18 years old. I had dabbled in all sorts of drugs. I always had this underlying pain or shame, like you said, of who I was. If you guys really knew who I was, you couldn't possibly love me. And so I've got to constantly wear the mask. I've got to constantly medicate. I've got to constantly be doing something that is distracting me or taking my mind or numbing the pain, so that I'm not focused on the core of my insecurities and my shame. And I did that in every way possible. The performing, I've always been a singer. I'm a worship leader now. But I got to travel around with some men's ensembles and some a cappella groups and some barbershop quartetting. And I got to travel around and compete and perform. And that was, always chasing that validation, right? In just every possible way. And it always leaving me empty. It's fun for a little while. Like medication, it numbs the pain for a little while, but the pain always comes back, and I wasn't ever dealing with my wounds. And so, growing up, that progression was from pornography to sleeping around to drugs and alcohol to, performing and all of these different things that the world says will make you happy, and having to come to the end of those things and still being left empty, finally putting my hands up in the air. And at that time of my life, I was in 2011, and I was ironically also 23 years old. And I had a buddy that kept inviting me to church. And by this time I was a young adult and had really no desire to attend church on my own because of my own conviction of how I was living. I knew I was living in a way that didn't please God. And so what am I going to go to church for? And but he was gracious, and he kept inviting me week after week. And I finally said, okay, man. And it was funny because that weekend I showed up and his phone died. And so I get to church and I get stiffed on my bro date to church. Yep. And I'm like in the parking lot, he's not answering his phone. Do I just turn around and go home? I'm already here. I might as well walk in. And I'm so glad that I did. The Lord wanted me there. It was a divine appointment because it was the first sermon of a series called Sex, Romance, and Reality. And I remember so clearly some of the things that Pastor Matt said from stage. Is if the world's way is right and God's way is wrong, why is something that's literally designed to produce life causing so much death? He read the statistic, if every person on planet Earth only had one sexual partner for the rest of their lives, then 99.9% of all STDs would be eradicated within one generation. And I was just like, and everything he kept talking about was just hitting me square between the eyes. And I'm like, this guy is reading my book. Like, he's reading my mail. And
I have a buddy who had a similar situation, but his buddy was there at church. They were sitting beside each other. And as he's listening to the message, he's literally getting mad and looking at his buddy thinking, you have obviously talked to the pastor about my life. And of course, he hadn't said anything to him whatsoever. But I mean, it was just shocking to him that he was reading his mail so clearly.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was February of 2011 for me. I was 23 years old, and I, like you had mentioned, I had prayed the sinner's prayer leading up to that. I had rededicated my life, and responded to some altar calls a few times in my life prior to that, but this time it was real. And this time it was, okay, God, I'm ready.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think I had a real willingness for the first time to just be real. That was at Sandals Church in Riverside, California. And their vision that I'm so grateful for is authenticity. It's real with self, real with God, real with others. We don't put on a mask. We don't play church. This isn't a country club for the good people. It's a hospital for the broken. And I was deeply broken. And I'm so grateful for Pastor Matt and Pastor Andrew, who took time and mentored and discipled me and loved on me where I was at. And I still had so far to go. Oh my gosh, I had so far to go. And there were deep, deep layers that the Lord needed to peel back. But that's where I made my beginning. And so I said, okay, Lord, if what this guy's saying is true and you could still love me through all of this, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. What you just described in that church is exactly, frankly, why our ministry exists. There's other things that we do, but our essential core reason for existing is to help the church become just what this church was talking about. And I see sometimes you'll walk in and you'll see these great statements and aspirations on the wall of a church or what have you, but it's easy to come up with, even if it takes some time. It's pretty easy to come up with a mission statement and purpose statement and some really good things that you can put on the wall. But that's all good. I'm not putting any of that down. But the problem is more often than not, we aren't living it out as a church. Most churches are not living in authenticity. They're not certainly not with one another. That's for darn sure, and oftentimes not with ourselves, and sometimes not even that much with God. Even though we know He knows everything. But the church, we believe, has become so anemic in our culture because of all of the rampant brokenness and sin and a lot of it sexual within everyday Christians' lives. And we're not getting real with anybody about it. In our men's groups, our women's groups, our small groups, it's the one thing we're not talking much about. And we often say it's a stage 3 or 4 cancer running through the underbelly of the church. So I love what you're describing. I found a church God brought me to a church like that as well. And that's where so much healing happened for me. And in my case, I was in my mid 30s at that point and had been in lots of quote unquote good churches preaching the truth in the word, but they weren't authentic. They weren't willing to get messy, and getting messy is not easy, but getting messy is a requirement for the church because you're dealing with broken people's lives. And if we want to see people transformed, we have to be able to live out James 5:16, confess your sins to one another and pray for each other that you might be healed. So anyway, from there, Jonny, where did God kind of take you from that time and the mentoring that you got through the pastors and others there at the church?
Yeah. From there, I was kind of in and out of college at that point. I'd messed around. I'd squandered a lot of my dad's money on a semester at a private Christian school prior to that. And he had told me, I'm not paying for school anymore. And so I stopped going for a while, then went back to community college. And after this experience in 2011 and rededicating my life to the Lord, I know my dad saw a change in me. And that summer, I remember it clearly. We were on the lake. We were up in Lake Powell, and we were on a boat. And I said, Dad, I think I want to go back to Cal Baptist University. And he said, I ain't paying for it. I said, okay. He said, but if you get straight A's, I'll reimburse you. And I said, deal.
Guy.
Yeah. So I remember sitting in the very front row of every single one of my classes. And that first semester, I had entered as a business administration major, and got straight A's. And during that semester, I took a class called God's Heart for the Nations by Jeff Lewis. And it was so powerful because I learned so much about God's mission and God's heart for all people, and how so much of the world is still living and dying without the gospel.
Yes.
And so that kind of rattled me quite a bit, and I changed my major from business to Christian studies, basic Christian ministry degree. And I had signed up for a missions trip that following semester. What's funny is my now wife was the student leader of that missions trip. We spent 3 weeks in Indonesia. But when she saw my name, she had known of me from my semester back in 2008, because I had taken one of her friends out on a date. We went to a baseball game, and I just was so full of myself. I just talked about myself the whole time, trying to impress this girl, and she just thought I was the worst. Right. I thought I was the best. She knew I was the worst, and I was. And so fast forward back to 2011, now 2012, where I'd signed up for this mission trip. My wife saw my name on the list, and she was like, got
to steer clear of him.
This can't be the same guy. So, she wanted to meet up with me. We met for coffee, and, she wanted to get me off the team as quickly as possible if I was who she knew me to be. And I remember sitting down and we had coffee, and I just shared my testimony with her, and she just couldn't believe that I was the same person. And it was kind of cool. And over the course of the training for the missions trip, we became really close friends, and I just began to trust her. And then over the 3 weeks in Indonesia, the Lord had randomly, the Lord had paired us for activities together, and we fell in love. And so when we got back, we started dating, and 6 months later, I asked her to marry me, and 6 months after that, we were married. But the problem was, I still had all these issues and these deep-rooted addictions that I wanted to get rid of. I wanted to heal from, but I didn't know how. I didn't.
Well, I want to pause right there too. Hold that thought. It's so important. But I really want to underscore. So you've had powerful experiences with Jesus. You've gone on this missions trip. You're genuinely a Christ follower now. You've fallen in love with this amazing young woman, and yet there's still all of this crap, all of these wounds, all of the propensity, like your brain has been trained for porn and for sexual behavior and all of that. It's not just a spiritual issue. It's an entire body, spirit, soul, and body issue. And so I just want to say to those listening, watching this, that you may be experiencing something similar in the midst of just the feeling of insanity and frustration about how can I possibly be someone who loves Jesus or wants to follow him and wants my life to be devoted to him, and yet I keep stumbling over these same stinking patterns of sin. and giving into these things. The idea that you've come to faith in Christ and given your life to him doesn't automatically fix all of the wounds, all the brokenness, all the history of patterns of sin. And so that's something that the Lord can absolutely do something about. We're going to talk about that, but it doesn't happen in an instant just because you've surrendered your life to Jesus. That's the doorway. That's the beginning. But we have to be willing to go back to those wounded, broken places. But Jonny, I love hearing your story. Just continue on with, you got in this relationship and yet.
Yeah. And yet, and man, if I could just piggyback on what you said to the person that is struggling, I find great comfort in Romans, where Paul talks about the very thing that I want to do, I don't do, and the thing that I don't want to do, I do, and just this wrestle between the spirit and the flesh, right? Paul, a person who wrote half the New Testament, one of the greatest of all time when it comes to missionaries and just followers of Jesus, that same guy talks about the wrestle with his flesh and his spirit, and not to encourage that or to even to justify it, but to give you hope and comfort. And I would wrestle and question my salvation. I would think, how can I call myself a follower of Jesus? How can I be a Christian and still do these things over and over and over and over again? And I remember one of the guys that mentored and discipled me, Pastor Andrew, he said, listen, bro, people who aren't saved aren't worried about being saved. The fact that you're worried about your salvation is actually evidence of salvation. People that
and also our misery of sin.
Yes.
I felt like, I'm just living this debauched, disgusting life, but I was miserable in my sin. It wasn't just that I knew that what I was doing is wrong. I knew that as a kid growing up. I was religious. I knew what was right. But now there's the witness of the Spirit is now within me, and there was a battle, a war going on, and I was miserable living out patterns of sin. I think that's also evidence of something genuine. I mean, you don't want to stay there. That's not a fun place to be at all. But that's part of coming through these addictive patterns.
Absolutely. And what you said kind of leading up to this is exactly right. Is I had trained myself to live a certain way for so long. I had my comfort. I had my blankie, right? That I would run to when things went wrong, or to celebrate things went right. And later in Romans, Paul talks about being transformed by the renewing of your mind. Yes. Well, I had had an authentic conversion experience where, the Lord's presence met me where I was at. And yet I still had all of these broken thought patterns and all of these broken beliefs, even about myself and about the Lord. There was a lot of undoing that needed to be done, and a lot of retraining that needed to happen, and some discipline that needed to be learned as well. And so over the course of the next few years, the Lord began to work on some of the stuff, some of my struggles, one at a time. I remember entering marriage. I had told my wife that I had been addicted to porn, and even sharing my testimony and just being open about it from the very beginnings of our friendship in the missions training and the missions trip stuff. But I think she had kind of thought like, oh, that is a thing of the past, and he's different now, and he doesn't do that anymore. And I may have been selective in when and how I chose to share those things with my new bride, and still learning to come out of hiding, right?
Yes.
But the Lord began to work through the men in my life. Pastor Andrew in particular, he would meet with me once a week, and he had never wrestled with sexual addiction himself, But he was a godly man and an awesome man. And so he did his best to try to mentor me and guide me through it. And he helped train me a lot in the ways of discipline. And, but he could only give away what he had, right? And you can't give away what you don't have. And he had brought up this men's sexual freedom group, that Sandals had. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. I don't want to go to the creeper group. Like,
right. That's for those guys.
Meeting with you is cool. I'm good here. I don't know those guys or what that group looks like. So, yeah, things aren't that bad. So I'll just keep doing this. Right. Well, things got that bad, eventually. And they always do. Addictions are progressive. You need more, stimulus to experience the same high. And, you know, the law of diminishing returns is certainly true for all addictions. And so I ended up having to hit a rock bottom, several rock bottoms. There's a saying in recovery groups is, I'm sure you're aware, there's the bottom you know and a bottom below.
Yes. Yeah, several, yes.
And the beauty is, I guess the beauty is you get to choose where your rock bottom is.
That's true.
And I don't always learn my lesson, but when I do, it's the hard way. Yeah, I'm pretty hard-headed, and I had to experience some deep misery in order to produce the willingness to allow the Lord to really come and invade those parts of my heart that I wanted to stay hidden, or that I wasn't ready to share, or that I wasn't ready to let go of. Mm-hmm. And it started with Adderall. I was kind of addicted to Adderall. I've diagnosed as ADHD, ADD, and now I curb that with exercise and with caffeine, coffee, and I can do pretty well. But it's probably evident from this podcast, if you made it this far, that I bounce around quite a bit.
That's both of us. So hopefully people can follow what on earth we're talking about. But yes.
And so, I had become addicted to Adderall. I began to abuse it. At first, it helped me get through college, and naturally I can't sit down and just write a 12-page essay. That's really, really hard for me. And so the medication helped me. And eventually I started to abuse it because it makes you feel good. It's a drug. And then it got out of control, and I had to hit a rock bottom where I lost a job, actually working for one of my dad's companies. So that was very humiliating and embarrassing. But the Lord used that to remove the Adderall from my life. I would still call myself an alcoholic, although I wasn't drinking all the time. When I did drink, I would drink a lot. And I had built up a big tolerance at that point in my life. And my wife didn't grow up drinking. Alcohol wasn't a part of her family or her life. But when I did drink, I felt like I needed to get a really big bang for my buck. And so I would, when I did drink, I would drink a lot, and for me, 1 is too many and 15 isn't enough.
Yep.
And, after the Lord graciously and difficultly, removed the Adderall, the alcohol was up next. And it unfortunately took me getting drunk, and kissing another woman to remove that from me. And that was something that I would thought and said that I would never do. I would never cheat on my wife. That's a line that I would never cross. And the thing about addictions is you cross those lines. Yes. You eventually do. It's not if, it's when. If you continue down those roads. And so, but the Lord was gracious in that, even that my wife Kelly worked through it with me, and she wanted to work towards reconciliation. She could have quit. I'd put her through a lot with the alcohol and the Adderall and the porn at this point.
But
And
she
I
also
met,
wasn't just like, oh, it doesn't really matter, or I don't,
oh no.
I mean, you got your butt kicked, I think, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
dude. Kelly is she is a strong woman,
Mm-hmm.
and she loves the Lord, and she does not have a high tolerance for BS.
Yep.
And so it wasn't like, oh, I forgive you, everything is going to be okay.
Yeah.
It was like, you need to figure your stuff out, or I am out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember she kicked me out, and I lived in my buddy's little closet for about a month. Um, and it was at that time where I was really ready to get the help that I needed. And the group that Pastor Andrew had mentioned to me on more than one occasion, I finally became willing to go and see and find out what it was all about. Um, and that
Another
was
great example of how we get to choose our bottom, right?
like,
Like God gives us so many off ramps, and I did the same thing. I'm like, no, I'm gonna let that pass by. I'm not ready. I'm not, whatever. It's for those people. I mean, whatever the case is. Then finally, yeah. I mean, he keeps turning up the heat until we're on the verge of losing everything.
yeah. And I was. And so as Kelly and I had met, we sat down and came up with some boundaries and some requirements. And I think that was actually one of the requirements that she had of me, was to attend a group. And I had no qualms about it. I know some guys show up to groups like that, to NA or AA or SA, or groups like Revive 40 or this men's sexual freedom group that was offered to me at Sandals. Some guys show up just because their wives force them to, and
Yeah.
inwardly they're really not ready. They're just there to check a box.
Mm-hmm.
It was both for me. My wife demanded it, and I was ready.
Yeah.
I had come to the point in my life where, you know, and I'll just say this: leading up to this point in my addiction, there were so many times where I cried out to God desperately, like, why won't you take this from me?
Mm.
No, I know that you hate this sin, and I know that you can snap your finger and heal me of this. So why won't you? And even having just an indignation towards God about that, and an anger, and what I felt like was a righteous anger, but he didn't. He didn't snap his finger and heal me in a moment. And it took me years to realize that the reason I think that he didn't was because he wanted to grow my dependence on him.
Yep.
He didn't want to just be my genie in a bottle and make my wish come true, even if it was something that he wanted. He wanted me to learn how to depend on him and how to grow in my faith and trust in him daily.
Yep.
And the truth is, we're always desperate for him. The only thing that changes is our awareness
That's true.
of our desperation for him. And by not snapping his finger and healing me in a moment, that was his grace and kindness towards me, that I would learn how to depend on him for my needs daily.
Yeah, I love just everything that you're sharing there, Johnny. When you mentioned about the guys coming to a group, or whether that's their wives making them do that or some court mandated thing. I mean, there's what a waste of both time and opportunity, especially opportunity, to simply come and check the box off and come with our hearts hardened and our arms folded or whatever, and just uh, getting through the time and leaving, when if we would only soften our hearts, if we would, and we have a choice about doing that, if we would begin to open up our hearts to the possibility of what God might do with this, there's so much opportunity for change and transformation, that we wouldn't have to hit another bottom and another bottom and another bottom, but we could begin to move forward. So, but also the the constant pursuit of God toward us, to it's out. We may feel like in the time that he's punishing us, or he's being harsh with us, but he's only being as harsh as our behavior and our resistance requires. And I that was a hard lesson to learn, and I didn't understand it at the time at all. And I even remember in my sexual addiction and my struggles, just feeling like, I mean, castration would be better than this. Like, I mean, even
Yeah.
chemical something, right? But
Yeah.
it's
Jesus'
this.
words, tear out your right eye or
Yeah,
tear out your eye or cut off your
I'm
hand.
like,
I
oh
thought about
man,
it.
right.
I thought about it.
Yeah, exactly, right. But the point in doing that, again, is almost, again, it's I just want the quick fix right now, versus this invitation of that Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, you need to take up your cross daily and follow after me.
Mm,
And none of us want to do that. And the truth is, I love these kind of conversations with someone like you, who didn't experience the stuff that I experienced in terms of same-sex attraction and being off, and being a bartender at a gay club and giving myself over to that. Because, and here's the reason, there's lots of reasons, but one of the reasons I love this is because I get a little bit weary of my former community, and God loves the LGBT community. He wants to draw people out of that. There's no doubt about it.
yeah.
But there's a way in which we've embraced such a level of self-pity and such a level of feeling like we're so uniquely victimized, and that nobody understands us. Like, the average straight dude doesn't get what it's like to deal with the stuff that we deal with. But the truth is, yeah, there's things that of course you don't understand. There's things about your life that I don't fully understand. But the truth that you're describing is these years and years of struggle and battle that are on par with anything I've ever wrestled with, in terms of the magnitude of it, the just the wallowing in the pig pen and the misery that comes along with that. That we can all experience that, regardless of what our background has been. And so this idea of learning, like, I look back now and I think you're in the same place where I just show up and wave your wand, give me the genie's lamp to rub the right way and give me my 3 wishes or whatever. And one of those would certainly be take away homosexuality and give me, or same-sex attraction, give me heterosexual attraction. But I know now, looking back, that I would have missed so much
Mm,
maturing and nurture, and even becoming a man made in God's image, leaning into that more. What does that even look like? What does it look like to be, now I get to be a biological father and oftentimes a spiritual father? I mean, it's crazy to me about how the way that God has turned all of this around for good. And of course, I'm still very much a work in progress. You mentioned
yeah.
selfishness. It's certainly true for me. But the idea that that God can take all of this junk, and for the person listening to this, or the person listening, and maybe you're not in the same place, but you have a son or daughter or other friends or whatever who are not giving up hope. That's another thing I look back
Mm,
on. It was my mom's prayers, especially my
mm,
dad too, that were, I know those were somehow, in the mystery of how God uses prayer, that those were a thread through my rebellious, chaotic,
yeah.
totally depraved and broken life, that also drew me back to a place of finally coming to sanity on the side
Mm.
of an interstate at 23 and giving my life to Christ for real. So I don't know, what are your thoughts about anything that I'm sharing there?
Just so good and so true, and I resonate and relate to all of it. Yeah, the broken attractions are broken attractions.
Yeah.
And I had an extremely broken attraction to the female body. The female body was my god for so long, and it's no different than the male body being one's god, or
And it goes deeper than that, right? It also,
right.
that's true, that, like, that's the symbolic nature of it, and obviously has definitely a power of its own in terms of lust and cravings, bodily release, all of that. But at the end of the day, there's so much that's deeper. I feel like what we're talking about there in terms of bodies,
Yeah.
true, but also kind of the tip of the iceberg. Underneath is this mammoth kind of mountain of emotional need, a desire to be pursued, a desire to be able to win someone's heart, a desire to feel something about ourselves that we don't actually feel. And a lot of it, I think, is we often say that we meet legitimate needs that God has given us in
Mm,
illegitimate ways, right? And
absolutely.
I think that's a part of this whole mess, is learning how to meet those legitimate ways in a way that is truly legitimate. But it's not on par with these addictive, sensational, instant rush kind of experiences where
Right.
we have used the flesh to be inflamed, our own flesh to be inflamed by somebody else's, etc. The journey that Christ invites us on is something that is so much more deeper, so much more deep, and so much more wholesome.
Yeah.
But it takes a while for our bodies and minds and brains to be retrained on the reality that this is so much more beautiful and stable and wholesome than this other junk that I was pursuing for so long.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think I was just saying that to kind of
Yes.
to just connect, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's so many similarities. There's some differences, but there's so many similarities. And I had a spiritual problem that I took physical solutions to
Yes.
that could never work. And the spiritual solution is hard, in a road that is not easy. You know, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary. My yoke is easy and my burden is light." But it's a journey and it's work.
Yeah, it is.
And you know, you look at the imagery of a yoke. Even you're still alongside, you're next to Jesus, plowing a field, doing work, being yoked.
Yep.
And it takes discipline and commitment and hard work.
But the results are so worth it. I mean,
So worth it.
finishing out that analogy, like, you can't have a crop that's going to feed you and supply for your family, etc., if we're not willing to get in and be yoked to Christ and plow up the fields of our life and allow him to get in and really intervene. Well, Jonny, I've loved this conversation. It'd be fun maybe to even have you back on again to do some further exploration of some of these things. But thank you for contributing also to our men's testimonial book, New Identity. We appreciate that. Appreciate you. Thanks for sharing with our audience.
What an honor. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm grateful for the work that you're doing. And God bless you. God bless the Love and Truth Network. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, let's just pray real quick. I don't usually wrap up our podcast with prayer, but I feel prompted to do that. Lord, I want to pray for those who are listening or watching this podcast, that whether it's when it's first released or months or years down the road, God, I pray that for those listening who are feeling hopeless, who are feeling bound up, who relate to a lot of what Jonny has talked about, what I've talked about, that Lord, we know that you're able to intervene and break through, but we have to be willing to say yes to your steps, to your next direction. And Lord, we have to find that bottom. But Lord, thank you that you give us so many off ramps from our sin and our brokenness. Would you lead the people listening to this or viewing this to churches and groups that would be able to really walk with them in a way that is loving and gracious and truth-based, that they can find a church that practices that reality of living both in truth and in love. And so, God, we just ask that you would transform lives through this podcast, through Jonny's story, and we give you all the credit. We're so grateful for the way that you've turned our lives around in ways we could never even imagine, and given so much to us, way beyond anything we deserve. What we deserve is hell. What we deserve is brokenness, that the results of our sin. The wages of sin is death, is what your word says. But Lord, you've lavished us through turning around and repenting and obeying you. You've lavished us with things that we never deserve, in these good gifts that you give to us, as James talks about. So would you bless our brothers and sisters who are listening to this podcast, and would you be transformational in their lives? In Jesus' name we pray all this. Amen. We so appreciate the time you've just invested with us in our Transforming Congregations podcast. To join us for future podcasts, dial into transformingcongregations.org/podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in a future podcast.